The Dominion had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had conquered more than 200 species across 40 star systems. Their warships numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their soldiers were bred for battle from birth. In all their long history, they had never lost a war. Supreme Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and looked at the holographic display showing a small blue planet, Earth, home to a species called humans. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They had only one planet. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships were slow. And yet, these creatures had the nerve to say no to him. Was a creature, standing 8 feet tall with 4 arms and a hard shell that could stop most weapons. His compound eyes reflected the blue glow of Earth as he remembered the insult from 3 days ago. The Galactic Council had welcomed humanity as a new member. This was normal. New species joined the Council all the time. Most of them quickly learned their place. The strong ruled. The weak served. This was the natural order of things. Had sent his diplomats to Earth with a simple offer: sign the Protectorate Treaty, become a servant race to the Dominion. In exchange, the humans would receive protection and technology. They would mine resources for the Dominion. They would provide workers and soldiers. It was a generous offer. Most species accepted it without question. The human delegate was a young woman named. She was small, barely reaching his chest. She had black hair and dark eyes that showed no fear. When the diplomat presented the treaty, she had read it carefully. Then she had smiled. "No," she said simply. The diplomat had not understood at first. "Perhaps you need time to consider. The alternative is—" "The alternative is war," interrupted. "We understand. The answer is still no. You cannot win a war against the Dominion. No species has ever." "Then we will be the first," stood up and straightened her uniform. "Humanity does not kneel, not to you, not to anyone. If you want our planet, you will have to take it from us. And I promise you, Commander, you will pay for every inch of ground in blood." The transmission had ended there. Had not felt anger at that moment. He had felt something closer to amusement. These humans were like small insects making threats against a giant. It was almost cute. But an example had to be made. The Galactic Council was watching. If they allowed a primitive species to insult them without consequence, others might get ideas. Other servant races might think they could resist. No, Earth would burn. Humanity would be exterminated. And the galaxy would remember what happened to those who the Dominion activated the communication system and broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy. Every species, every planet, every ship would hear his words. "This is Supreme Commander of the Dominion. The species known as humanity has rejected our generous offer of protection. They have chosen war. In 30 standard days, the Armada will arrive at Earth. We will accept nothing less than complete surrender. If the humans resist, they will be destroyed. Let this be a lesson to all who would defy the Dominion." He ended the transmission and turned to his officers. "Prepare 15,000 ships. I want this done quickly and cleanly." Across the galaxy, species watched the broadcast with mixed feelings. Some felt pity for humanity. Some felt relief that it was not their planet being targeted. A few felt something like hope, wondering if perhaps this small species might somehow survive. But most simply shook their heads. They had seen this before. They knew how it ended. On Earth, the broadcast was received with silence. World leaders gathered in emergency meetings. Military commanders reviewed their forces. Scientists calculated the odds of survival. The numbers were not good. Earth had 300 warships. They were bringing 15,000. Earth's best weapons could barely scratch shields. They had conquered species with technology far more advanced than humanity's. By every logical measure, humanity should have begun surrender negotiations immediately. Every military expert in the galaxy expected them to beg for mercy. Instead, something strange happened. Admiral was 63 years old. He had served in Earth's military for 40 years. He had gray hair, a calm face, and eyes that had seen too much death. When he received the broadcast, he was eating dinner with his wife. He watched the message twice. Then he finished his meal, kissed his wife goodbye, and drove to the United Earth Defense Council headquarters. The meeting room was full of generals, admirals, and political leaders. Everyone was talking at once. Some were arguing for surrender. Some were demanding impossible defensive measures. Some were simply panicking. Sat quietly and waited. Eventually, the room noticed his silence and grew quiet. Admiral, the Secretary General said, "What is your assessment?" Looked at the holographic display showing the fleet. 15,000 ships, millions of soldiers, weapons that could crack planets. 30 days, he said slowly. That's generous of them. The room erupted in confusion. Generous, Admiral, we can't possibly. Raised his hand, and the room fell silent again. They expect us to spend those 30 days negotiating surrender. They expect us to be afraid. They expect us to be like every other species they've conquered. He stood up and walked to the holographic display. But they don't understand what humans are. They see our small fleet, our primitive weapons, our single planet. They think we are weak. He turned to face the room. They are wrong. Admiral, with respect, the math is irrelevant, said. The fight wars with numbers and technology. They have never faced an enemy that refuses to surrender. They have never faced an enemy that will fight to the last man, woman, and child. They have never faced humans. He pressed a button, and the display changed to show Earth's defensive plans, not the official plans that the government had created. The real plans. The ones that and a small group of officers had been developing for years, waiting for this exact moment. We have 30 days, he said. In 30 days we will turn this solar system into a graveyard, not our graveyard, theirs. The Secretary General stared at the plans. They were insane. They were impossible. They required sacrifices that no civilized species would ever consider. This will cost millions of lives, she whispered. Yes, agreed, but it will cost them more, and in the end we will still be standing. He looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. They have conquered 200 species. They have never lost. They think war is about strength and numbers. They are about to learn what war really is. He smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. War is about will, and no species in this galaxy has more will than humanity. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the Secretary General nodded. Tell us what you need, Admiral. Turned back to the display. Everything. I need everything. And I need every human being on this planet ready to fight. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council watched Earth with curiosity. They expected to see panic, surrender negotiations, desperate pleas for help. Instead, they saw factories working around the clock. They saw civilians training with weapons. They saw ships being built at impossible speeds. They saw a species preparing for war. And for the first time in 10,000 years, some of them began to wonder if perhaps they had made a mistake. Commander stood on the bridge of her warship and watched the stars. She was leading the Vanguard fleet, 200 ships sent ahead of the main armada to scout the human defenses. It was an easy mission. The humans had no real military power. This would be a simple observation run before the real invasion began. Was young for a commander, only 150 years old. She had earned her position through dozens of successful campaigns against lesser species. She knew how these things worked. The enemy would send a few ships to meet them. Those ships would be destroyed. Then the enemy would panic and start begging for peace. The same story, over and over again. Her fleet passed the outer planets without incident. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all empty, no defenses, no ships. The humans were probably huddled on their planet, praying to whatever gods they believed in. "Commander," her sensor officer reported, "we are entering the asteroid belt." Nodded. The asteroid belt was a ring of rocks between Mars and Jupiter, useless debris, nothing to worry about. "Continue on course," she ordered. The first explosion came without warning. A cruiser vanished in a ball of fire, then another, then three more, watched in shock as her display filled with emergency signals. "What is happening?" she demanded. "Weapons fire coming from the asteroids." Looked at the sensor display. The asteroids were not just rocks, they were hiding something, thousands of somethings. Rail guns, missile launchers, kinetic impactors. The humans had turned the asteroid belt into a massive minefield. Every rock was a weapon, and they were all firing at once. "Shields up, return fire," commanded. But her shields were designed for energy weapons. Lasers, plasma, the things that civilized species used in war. The humans were throwing rocks. Metal slugs accelerated to incredible speeds. Nuclear warheads. Simple, brutal physical attacks. The shields flickered and died under the assault. Lost 60 ships in 11 minutes. She ordered a retreat to regroup beyond the asteroid belt. Her remaining ships formed a defensive formation while damage reports came in. 60 ships destroyed, 40 more damaged, 100 casualties per ship. 6,000 soldiers dead in less than 15 minutes, and they had not even seen a single human. "Commander," her communications officer said nervously, "I am picking up a transmission from the human forces." "Put it through." A human face appeared on the screen. It was a man, maybe 40 years old, wearing a military uniform. He was smiling. "Hello there," the human said. "Welcome to our solar system. I am Captain and I will be your opponent today. I hope you enjoyed our welcoming gift. There is plenty more where that came from." Stared at the screen. The human was mocking her. Her fleet had just lost 60 ships, and this creature was treating it like a game. "You will pay for this," she said coldly. "Maybe," agreed. "But not today. Today you have two choices. You can turn around and go home, or you can keep coming and we will keep killing you. Your choice, Commander." The transmission ended. Considered her options. She could retreat and wait for the main fleet. That would be the smart choice. But it would also be an admission of weakness. The did not retreat. "All ships forward," she ordered. "We break through the asteroid belt and continue to Earth." The second assault was even worse than the first. The human weapons were primitive, but they were everywhere. For every weapon her ships destroyed, 10 more appeared, and the humans had learned from the first engagement. They targeted engines and shield generators. They used the asteroids themselves as weapons, pushing them into collision courses with ships. Lost another 40 ships before she cleared the asteroid belt. She was about to order a regrouping when the human ships appeared. They were small, tiny compared to warships, single-pilot fighters that should have been meaningless against her fleet, but there were hundreds of them and they attacked from every direction at once. Had studied human military tactics before the mission. She knew they were supposed to fight in formations, following orders from their commanders. That was how civilized species fought. These pilots were not following any formation she recognized. Each one was attacking independently, making their own decisions, taking insane risks that no pilot would ever consider. They flew into point-blank range, fired everything they had, and then retreated before her gunners could respond. One pilot flew directly toward her flagship. Her point defense systems tore his ship apart, but he kept coming. The burning wreck of his fighter crashed into her shield generator, destroying it completely. Another pilot rammed his ship into the engine section of a cruiser. The explosion killed him instantly, but it also crippled the cruiser. Lieutenant was 26 years old. He had been a commercial pilot before the war, flying passenger ships between Earth and Mars. When the declared war, he had volunteered for the Defense Force. His fighter was damaged, engines failing, weapons empty. He was going to die anyway, so he made a choice. He flew his crippled ship directly into the open hangar bay of a carrier. The carrier was loading troops for the ground invasion. 4,000 soldiers packed into the deployment area. Activated his reactor's self-destruct and smiled. The explosion was visible from Earth. Watched the carrier die and felt something cold settle in her stomach. The human had killed himself on purpose. He had turned his own death into a weapon. This was not war as she understood it. This was something else. She sent an urgent message to Supreme Commander. "They do not fight like a species," she reported. "They fight like individuals. Every single one of them makes their own choices. They do not retreat. They do not surrender. They throw away their lives like they mean nothing, and they are taking us with them." His response was dismissive. "Continue the mission. You have superior numbers and technology. Use them." Wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. Had never fought humans. He did not understand what she was seeing. She reorganized her remaining ships and pushed toward Earth. The human fighters harassed them every step of the way. Small attacks, hit and run, never a decisive engagement, just constant, endless, painful losses. By the time she reached Earth orbit, she had lost 120 ships, more than half her fleet, destroyed by a species that was supposed to be primitive and weak. She looked at the blue planet below her and saw lights flickering across the surface. Cities, billions of humans, all of them she now realized, ready to fight. Her sensor officer reported human defensive platforms in orbit, missile bases on the surface, electromagnetic weapons that could disable shields. More surprises, always more surprises. "Commander," the officer said quietly, "the main fleet will arrive in 3 days. Should we wait for reinforcements?" Thought about her losses. She thought about the human pilot who had killed 4,000 soldiers with his death. She thought about the smile on Captain's face. "Yes," she said, "we wait." She had started this mission believing it would be easy. Now, she was beginning to understand why the humans had not surrendered. They were not afraid to die. And a species that was not afraid to die was the most dangerous enemy in the universe. The Galactic Council received her report with interest. For the first time in memory, a vanguard fleet had been stopped. Not defeated exactly, but stopped. In bars and meeting halls across the galaxy, species began to whisper. Maybe the humans had a chance after all. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally met their match. On Earth, the news of the Vanguard battle spread quickly. The celebration was brief. Everyone knew the main fleet was coming. 10,000 ships compared to the 200 that had brought. But they had won the first battle. They had proven that they could bleed. And that was enough to keep fighting. Supreme Commander arrived at Earth with 10,000 warships. The sky turned dark with their shadows. From the ground, it looked like the stars themselves had come down to destroy humanity. Had received reports about the Vanguard battle. He was not impressed. Yes, the humans had fought harder than expected. Yes, they had caused unexpected losses, but none of that mattered against the full might of the Armada. "Begin the landing," he ordered. "I want troops on every continent within 12 hours." They had conquered worlds with a fraction of this force. They had broken species that were far more advanced than humanity. Expected this campaign to last a few weeks at most. The humans would fight for a while, realize they could not win, and then surrender. That was how it always worked. The first wave of landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. They carried 500,000 soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy. They were 8 feet tall, covered in armor like shells, with 4 arms that could tear a human apart. They had energy weapons, personal shields, and centuries of combat experience. They landed in the major cities first. New York, London, Tokyo, Seoul, Beijing, Moscow. The plan was simple: capture the population centers, force the humans to surrender to protect their civilians. In Seoul, General Myra led the assault personally. She was one of most trusted commanders, with over 300 years of combat experience. She had conquered 11 worlds for the Dominion. Her troops marched through the empty streets with confidence. The humans had evacuated most of the civilians. The city was quiet, too quiet. "Spread out and secure the area," Myra ordered. "Find the human military forces and eliminate them." The first explosion came from a building on her left. A squad disappeared in a ball of fire. Then another explosion. Then gunfire from windows, rooftops, and underground tunnels. The humans had not retreated. They were everywhere. Myra watched in shock as her soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, were cut down by enemies they could not see. The humans used the buildings for cover. They attacked from sewers and basements. They hid in rubble and waited for patrols to pass before striking from behind. This was not war, this was chaos. In the mountains of Provence, Sargent received word that they had landed. He was 42 years old, a career soldier with 20 years of service. He had 30 soldiers under his command, mostly young recruits who had never seen real combat. Against them was a battalion of 2,000 soldiers, advancing through the mountain passes toward Seoul. The odds were impossible. Any reasonable commander would have retreated and waited for reinforcements. Was not a reasonable commander. "We hold this pass," he told his soldiers. "We do not retreat. We do not surrender. Every hour we hold them here is an hour our people have to prepare defenses in the city." His soldiers looked at him with fear and determination. They knew they were going to die. They accepted it. The battalion arrived at dawn. They expected to push through the pass quickly. Instead, they found themselves in a killing ground. Had spent the night preparing the terrain. He had placed explosives along the cliff walls. He had dug trenches and built barricades from fallen trees. He had positioned snipers in hidden locations with perfect lines of fire. The first assault lost 200 soldiers in 10 minutes. They tried again, and again. Each time, small force held them back. The narrow pass neutralized this numerical advantage. They could only attack in small groups, and each group was destroyed before it could break through. The battle lasted 6 days. Soldiers ran out of ammunition on the third day. They scavenged weapons from dead soldiers. When those ran out, they used rocks, knives, and their bare hands. On the 6th day, only and 3 others were still alive. They had lost over 800 soldiers, 800 elite warriors, killed by 30 humans with outdated weapons. The final assault came at sunset, was wounded in both legs. He could not walk. He sat against a rock with an empty rifle and watched the soldiers approach. He smiled at them. "What are you waiting for?" he called out. "Come and finish it." The commander hesitated. There was something wrong about this human. He was dying, outnumbered. He should have been begging for mercy. Instead, he was laughing. "You think you have won," said. "You have not won anything. There are billions of us. Every city, every village, every house will fight you. We will never stop. Never." He pressed a button hidden in his hand. The explosives he had buried along the cliff wall detonated. The mountain itself came down on the battalion, burying hundreds of soldiers under tons of rock. Died with a smile on his face. In Seoul, the resistance continued. They controlled the streets, but they did not control the city. Every building was a potential ambush. Every civilian was a potential soldier. Was 73 years old. Before the war, she had been a retired schoolteacher, spending her days tending her garden and playing with her. Her had been evacuated to safety. Her husband had died 5 years ago. She had nothing left to lose. She organized a resistance cell from her apartment building. 20 civilians, most of them older than 50, with no military training. She taught them how to make explosives from household chemicals. She showed them how to modify agricultural drones into weapons. She planned attacks on supply convoys with the same careful precision she had once used to plan lessons. Her cell destroyed 3 convoys in 2 weeks. They killed over 100 soldiers. They became a legend among the resistance, the grandmother who refused to surrender. They eventually found her. They surrounded her apartment building with 500 soldiers. They demanded her surrender. Appeared on the rooftop. She was wearing her old teaching clothes, a simple dress and comfortable shoes. She looked down at the soldiers with calm eyes. "You want me to surrender?" she called out. "Come up and get me." They stormed the building. They found it empty except for a large bomb she had built from stolen explosives. "Tell your commander something for me," said to the first soldier who reached her. "Tell him that every human he kills will cost him 10 of his own. Tell him this war will never end. Tell him." She pressed the detonator. The explosion destroyed the building and the command post next door. 300 soldiers died, including 2 generals. General Myra received the reports from across the planet with growing horror. The same stories everywhere. Humans fighting in ways that made no tactical sense, sacrificing themselves without hesitation, turning every victory into a defeat. She sent a message to Supreme Commander. "We are winning every engagement," she reported. "We are also losing this war. For every human we kill, 10 more appear. They do not break, they adapt, they endure, they simply will not stop." Read the message and dismissed her concerns. "Continue the campaign. We have superior numbers. Eventually they will run out of soldiers." But Myra knew the truth. They were not fighting an army. They were fighting a species. Every human, from children to grandparents, was a soldier. Every building was a fortress. Every death was a sacrifice that bought time for others. They had conquered 200 species. They had never faced anything like this. And deep in her heart, Myra began to wonder if they had finally met an enemy they could not defeat. On the bridge of the eternal conquest, watched the planet below and felt the first stirrings of doubt. The campaign was supposed to last weeks. It had been 3 months, and they still did not control the planet. The humans were dying by the millions, but they were not surrendering. They were not even slowing down. What kind of species was this? 3 months into the invasion, they controlled 40% of Earth's surface. Their flags flew over ruined cities on every continent. By their calculations, victory was only a matter of time. Supreme Commander reviewed the numbers with satisfaction. Human military casualties were in the tens of millions. Their industrial capacity was shattered. Their major cities were occupied. Every metric showed that they were winning. But something was wrong. It started small. Supply convoys disappeared between bases. Ships in orbit vanished from sensors without any sign of attack. Soldiers developed strange illnesses that their medical technology could not explain. Equipment failed at critical moments for no apparent reason. At first dismissed these incidents as random problems. War was messy, things went wrong, but the problems kept getting worse. Doctor was 38 years old, who had spent her career studying alien life forms. Before the war, her work had been purely academic. Now it was deadly. She worked in a hidden laboratory deep beneath the Korean mountains. Her team had captured soldiers in the early days of the invasion and studied their biology with obsessive detail. They learned how they breathed, how they processed nutrients, how their immune systems worked. Then they designed a weapon. The biological agent was elegant in its simplicity. It was not lethal. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it attacked the respiratory system, making it difficult for them to breathe in Earth's atmosphere. Infected soldiers became weak, tired, unable to fight effectively. The agent spread through physical contact. Within weeks, it had infected half the forces on Earth. General Myra noticed the change in her troops immediately. Soldiers who had been strong and alert became sluggish. Reaction time slowed. combat effectiveness dropped dramatically. "It is some kind of disease," her medical officers reported. "We cannot identify the source. We cannot find a cure." Myra looked at the map of their occupied territory. Everywhere the same reports: sick soldiers, declining performance, and the human resistance was getting bolder. They knew. Somehow, the humans knew exactly what was happening to her forces. Engineer was 52 years old, a communications specialist who had worked on satellite systems before the war. Now, he led a team of hackers operating from an abandoned factory inn. They had captured communication equipment during a raid 6 weeks ago. It had taken 2 weeks to understand how it worked. It had taken another 2 weeks to find the weaknesses. Now he owned the command network. He could read every message they sent. He could track every ship movement. He knew where their forces were weak and where they were strong. More importantly, he could send his own messages. False orders, phantom enemy, contradictory commands from headquarters turned this own communication system into a weapon against them. A battalion received orders to attack a position that did not exist. They marched for 3 days into an ambush. A supply convoy was redirected to a location controlled by the human resistance. The supplies fed the underground for months. 2 commanders received contradictory orders and ended up fighting each other before they realized the deception. Chaos spread through the ranks. No one knew which orders were real. No one trusted their communications. The perfect military machine began to break down. On the Eternal Conquest, received reports of the problems with growing frustration. His forces were being undermined from within, and he could not understand how. "Find the source," he ordered. "Find it and destroy it." But the humans were ghosts. They appeared, struck, and vanished. Every time the thought they had found a resistance base, it was already empty. The humans knew they were coming before they arrived. Because told them. Captain was 31 years old. Before the war, she had been a Marine, specializing in ship-to-ship combat. Now, she led a team of volunteers on missions that no one expected them to survive. Her target was the battleship Dominant Will, one of the largest ships in orbit. 3,000 crew members, enough firepower to destroy a continent. It was protected by dozens of escort ships and the most advanced shields in the galaxy. Planned to take it. Her team consisted of 50 volunteers, soldiers, engineers, civilians who had lost everything to the invasion. They trained for 3 weeks in captured equipment, learning how to move in zero gravity, how to fight in the tight corridors of an alien ship. The attack came during a supply transfer. The Dominant Will lowered its shields briefly to receive cargo from a transport ship. His team was hidden in the cargo. They emerged into the cargo bay with weapons blazing. The crew was caught completely off guard. They expected enemies outside the ship, not inside. Led her team through the corridors with brutal efficiency. They moved fast, never stopping to hold territory, always pushing toward the bridge. They tried to organize a defense, but the humans were too quick, too unpredictable. In the engine room, Engineer disabled the self-destruct system. In the communication center, Specialist took control of the ship's transmitters. On the bridge, faced the captain with a rifle in her hands. "You have 2 choices," she told him. "Surrender this ship or die with it." The captain looked at the human woman. She was small, insignificant compared to him. She should have been easy to kill, but her eyes held something he had never seen before. Complete certainty, absolute determination. He surrendered. The capture of the Dominant Will was broadcast across the galaxy. A single human team, 50 soldiers with primitive weapons, had taken one of the most powerful warships in the fleet. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. This was impossible. They were supposed to be invincible. No species had ever defeated them in direct combat. But the humans had not just defeated them, they had humiliated them. on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, received word of the dominant will's capture. For a long moment, he simply stared at the report, unable to process what he was reading. 50 humans, 3,000, and the humans had won. He thought about the past 3 months, the endless resistance, the impossible losses, the disease spreading through his troops, the communications failures, the captured battleship. The humans were not just fighting back, they were winning. "Commander," his aide said nervously, "the Galactic Council is requesting a statement. They want to know our plans for—" "Tell them nothing," interrupted. "Tell them the situation is under control." But it was not under control. For the first time in his 300-year career, did not know what to do. He had brought 15,000 ships to conquer a primitive species. He had expected an easy victory. Instead, he was facing the most dangerous enemy that had ever encountered. On Earth, the news of the dominant will spread like fire. After months of death and defeat, finally there was hope. Finally, proof that they could be beaten. Admiral received Captain's report with quiet satisfaction. The plan was working. Not the military plan, but something deeper. They were breaking this confidence. They were showing the galaxy that humans could not be conquered. "How long until the biological weapon is ready for wide deployment?" he asked Doctor. 3 months, she replied. "Maybe less if we can capture more subjects for testing." "And the fleet?" Engineer answered. "We have 6 captured warships now. More crews are training every day. In 6 months we could have a real fleet." Nodded. "Then we continue, we make them bleed, we make them doubt, and when the time is right we stop defending." He looked at the map of Earth, showing the territories still under human control. "We start attacking." They had come to Earth expecting to conquer a primitive species. They were about to learn what happened when that species decided to fight back. And the galaxy was watching. 6 months after the invasion began, Supreme Commander stood alone on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest and stared at the planet below. Earth, the world that was supposed to be an easy conquest, the world that had become his nightmare. The numbers told a terrible story. He had started with 15,000 ships. Now he had 9,000, 6,000 warships, destroyed or captured by a species that was not supposed to have a real military. He had landed 2 million soldiers. Half of them were sick with the human biological weapon. A quarter of them were dead. The rest were fighting an enemy that never stopped, never surrendered, never gave up. The humans had lost 30 million people. Cities were ruins. Entire regions were wastelands. By any normal measure, they were losing. But they were not behaving like a losing species. They were building, learning, adapting. Every day their weapons became more effective. Every day their tactics became more sophisticated. Every day more soldiers died. And now, for the first time in history, they were being attacked in space by an enemy fleet composed of their own captured ships. Captain had become a legend. Her fleet had grown from 1 captured battleship to 12. Human crews flew warships with a skill that should have been impossible. They struck supply lines and isolated outposts. They raided convoys and rescued prisoners. They were everywhere and they were relentless. So officers had begged him to bring reinforcements from them. He had refused. If word spread that they needed help against a primitive species, their entire empire would be at risk. Other servant races would see weakness. Rebellions would start. So he had fought on with the forces he had, and he had lost. General Myra was dead, killed in an ambush 3 weeks ago. Commander had been captured when her ship was boarded by human marines. Thousands of experienced officers had been killed or wounded. The war machine, the most powerful military in the galaxy, was breaking. Made a decision. He activated a secure communication channel to Earth's military command. A moment later, Admiral's face appeared on the screen. The human looked older than he had 6 months ago. Gray had spread through his hair. New lines marked his face. He had lost weight, but his eyes were the same, calm, steady, unbroken. "Commander," said, "I was wondering when you would call." Forced himself to speak calmly. "I am prepared to offer a ceasefire. The forces will withdraw to the outer solar system. We can begin negotiations for a permanent—" "No." Stopped. "I do not understand." Leaned forward. "You came to our home, you killed our children, you burned our cities. 30 million humans are dead because of you, and now you want to negotiate." "Admiral, be reasonable. A ceasefire would—" "Would what? Give you time to regroup, time to bring reinforcements, time to plan another attack." Shook his head. "No, Commander, we are past that now." Felt something cold settle in his chest. "Then what do you want?" "In 3 months, Doctor will complete a biological weapon that will make your species extinct. Not sick, extinct. We have been working on it since the war began. She is very close." Mandibles clicked in disbelief. "You would commit genocide." "You tried to commit genocide against us first. We are simply returning the favor." The human's voice was calm, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the extinction of an entire species. "In 6 months," continued, "Engineer will have built enough warships from captured vessels to bring this war to your— We know the coordinates. We know your defenses. We have been planning this for months." "That is impossible. You cannot." "In 1 year, Captain will be leading a fleet into the heart of your dominion. She has already selected her targets. Your shipyards, your breeding colonies, your government centers, everything that makes your species function." Stared at the human. This was not possible. They were bluffing. They had to be bluffing. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. "You have 2 choices," Commander said. "Complete, unconditional surrender. You withdraw all forces from our solar system. You return all captured humans. You pay reparations for the damage you have caused, and you never come near Earth again." "And if we refuse?" Smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cold determination. "Then we will do to you what you tried to do to us. We will find and we will burn it. We will hunt down every ship and destroy it. We will not stop until your species is a memory, a lesson for other empires that might think about threatening humanity." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And Commander, we are very good at holding grudges. We remember every wrong done to us, every death, every burned city, every orphaned child. We remember and we do not forgive." Was silent for a long moment. He thought about his options. He could refuse the surrender. He could fight on, but what would that accomplish? More death, more destruction, and eventually the outcome the human was describing. They had never lost a war. They had never surrendered. The shame would be beyond anything in their history. But the alternative was extinction. "I need time to consult with my government," said finally. "You have 1 hour," replied. "After that the offer expires, and we start planning our invasion." The communication ended. Stood alone on the bridge, staring at the blank screen. He thought about all the species they had conquered, all the worlds they had burned, all the civilizations they had destroyed. He had never once wondered what those species felt. They were inferior. They were weak. They deserved their fate. Now, for the first time, he understood. 1 hour later, accepted unconditional surrender. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. The Dominion, the most powerful empire in known space, had been defeated by humans, a species that had barely discovered space travel, a species with primitive weapons and a single planet. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. They had to decide how to respond to this unprecedented event. Some argued that humanity should be contained, kept isolated before they became a threat. Others suggested welcoming them as allies. In the end, they chose the second option, not because they trusted humans, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not. From Earth's solar system, Their empire, built over 10,000 years, collapsed within a decade. The servant races they had conquered rose up, inspired by humanity's example. The Great Dominion became a collection of squabbling territories, too weak to threaten anyone. On Earth, the survivors began to rebuild. The cities would take years to reconstruct. The wounds would take generations to heal, but humanity had survived. More than survived, they had won. Admiral retired 2 years after the war ended. He spent his remaining days in a small house by the ocean, watching the waves and thinking about all the people who had died so that humanity could live. Captain became the commander of Earth's new space fleet. She trained a new generation of soldiers to protect humanity from any future threats. She never forgot the volunteers who had followed her onto the dominant will. She named ships after them. Doctor continued her research, developing new medical technologies from what she had learned about biology. Engineer built the communication systems that connected Earth to the rest of the galaxy. A Galactic Council historian, studying the war centuries later, tried to understand what had happened. How had a primitive species defeated the most powerful empire in the galaxy? The answer, she eventually concluded, was simple. They made a fundamental error, she wrote. They believed war was about superior numbers, superior technology, superior strategy. They did not understand that war for humans was about something else entirely. It was about spite, about refusing to surrender no matter the cost, about fighting not because they could win, but because they refused to lose, about proving that no matter how powerful the enemy, humanity would never ever stop. The conquered 200 species. They thought they understood war. They did not. They understood conquest. They understood domination. They understood making others bow. Humans taught them the difference. The historian closed her record and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled the borders of their territory. Human colonies grew on a dozen worlds. Human children learned the stories of the war, of sergeant and grandmother and lieutenant and all the others who had given their lives. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity. Some even feared them. But mostly, they just remembered the lesson. Never threaten Earth. Because humans never forget. And they never forgive.